Midwifery Advisory Council meeting. I'm Carrie Sparvan and I chair this committee. I'd like to remind everybody to please either turn off your cell phones or set them to vibrate. This meeting is being webcasted. If you'd like to provide public comment, please fill out a speaker slip, which are located in the back, and hand it to Anna Marie Sewell, who's right here in the front row. Great. MAC members, a reminder that during today's meeting and all future MAC meetings, any items requiring a vote will be done by roll call. This means that once a motion is made and seconded, Ms. Lowe will call each of our names individually to request our vote, at which time you can vote in favor, against, or abstain. Any questions from anybody regarding this? No. Great. I would now like to call this meeting to order. Ms. Lowe, would you please call the roll?
Dr. Adams, Ms. Dugan, Ms. Holzer,
Yes.
Ms. Perez, Ms. Yaroslavsky,
Present.
Ms. Sparvan.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Great. Agenda item 2 is public comment on items not on the agenda. The council may not discuss or take any action on any matter raised during this public comment section that is not included on this agenda, except to decide whether to place the matter on the agenda of a future meeting. Is there any public comment on items not on the agenda? Seeing none, I'm moving on to the next agenda item. Agenda item 3 is approval of the March 16th, 2017 Midwifery Advisory Council meeting minutes.
So moved. To approve.
Move to approve. I second. Is there any public comment on this agenda item? Were there any edits provided to you, Ms. Lowe?
No, there was not.
Does anybody here on the council have any edits? All right. Would you call the roll, please, to approve?
Carrie, do I need to call the absent members? No. Okay. Ms. Holzer?
She's absent.
Oh, I'm sorry. Ms. Dugan?
Yes, I approve.
Ms. Ms. Perez?
Yes, I approve.
Ms. Yaroslavsky?
Yes.
Ms. Sparvan?
Yes.
Thank you.
Right. Agenda item 4 is the report from the chair, which is my report. I'd just like to begin by acknowledging how wonderful Natalie Lowe has been for us and how on top of everything she is, and let everybody know that she has gotten a promotion to a different position. She's still, I understand, going to work with us to help us to implement the changes to the LMAR, but she's going where she can do some programming. Is that correct? Yeah, okay. Well, thank you so much for all your help over the years. And the second thing that I'd like to address, since our last meeting, I've had some inquiries as to what specifically the MAC does and what we don't do. So I just wanted to let people know that we are a committee of the Medical Board of California. We don't have any independent ability to create practices. We can make recommendations to the full board, and then it's up to the board to decide whether to adopt those changes or not. I see this council as an interface between public consumers of midwifery care and licensed midwives in this state and the Medical Board of California. And our job is primarily to look at laws created by our legislature that may impact either one of those constituents, and create policies that promote public safety and serve the public. What we don't ever do is we don't review individual cases that are brought against individual midwives. That's not the function of this body at all. We don't make decisions about disciplinary actions towards any particular midwife or other healthcare provider. So that's that. Is there any comment on what I've said? Any questions? Any questions from members of the MAC? Oh, great. Seeing none, we're going to move forward. Agenda item 5 is an update on the American River College Midwifery program. And I was unable to attend the last meeting, which happened the week that I got married. And so I'm going to ask Ms. Kaleem Joy if she would please give us an update on how that went and where that program is.
Good afternoon, all. I am Kaleem Joy. I'm a licensed midwife, and I'm on the advisory committee for the Los Rios Community College District at American River College in Sacramento. This is for the development of a midwifery education program, and the program will be both a certificate as well as an associate degree in science in midwifery. The program will include a midwifery assistant certificate program, a doula training program, and some of the lactation programs that are already offered at Los Rios will be incorporated into this midwifery program. The prerequisites will be required as outlined in the statute for the midwifery training. Additionally, it will include a total of 84 semester units satisfying the requirements of the LMPA. The advisory committee has met twice with multiple interactions by email. Currently, Kathy Fox at American River College is a professor of maternal newborn nursing and is on faculty and is the midwifery program developer. She also has developed the lactation educator program, the assistant lactation consultant program, and the doula program that currently is at American River. Ms. Fox has received funding to begin the development of the curriculum for the midwifery program. The midwifery program will be available online for national or distance education throughout California and the United States, and also hopefully an on-site program that will be at American River College here in Sacramento. There are several steps, of course, involved with the process before it is released for the public to register for classes. The first will be curriculum development. This includes the overall design of the program with prerequisites, co-requisites from other departments, the midwifery course titles, and the unit values determined, all of the new courses initiated into the college curriculum development system, and all of this gets done by the end of fall 2017, which is no small feat. It will then go
this year?
this year.
Okay.
Yep.
It will then go to technical review, then on to the district board, followed by the Regional Health Workforce Consortium and the State Chancellor's Office. The advisory support by the midwifery community will be incorporated to assist Ms. Fox with the development and potential momentum needed for the prerequisite projection date. The good news is it is currently on a forward momentum. There is a projected availability date of spring 2019 for the first enrollment of students. The benefits of a community college program will allow an increased access to quality, affordable midwifery education, in addition to making financial aid available to those who qualify. The midwifery profession, as well as statistical data, substantiates that there is a high rate of prematurity and mortality among newborns of color and certain ethnicities. Increasing the availability and the affordability of quality midwifery education throughout California, as well as the United States, will increase the access to licensed midwifery care for all populations, including marginal ones. The Medical Board of California's approval will be applied for as a state-approved educational program for licensed midwives upon the completion of the program's development. I thank you for allowing me to review this and let you know that this program is progressing forward. And is there any questions that I can try and answer, or at least take that back to Ms. Fox and find an answer for you?
I just have a question that within this, I mean, congratulations on getting this moving forward, which is a big feat, but I do have one question, that is, will there be an opportunity as the curriculum moves forward to take a look at the needs of maybe remediation programs? That there could be courses designed for and used and applicable for those LMs that might need to have some kind of remediation?
I will take that back to her.
well as-
Remediation as well as challenge, perhaps?
Challenge as well as
Okay.
continuing educational courses.
Okay. Currently, those courses that are lactation and that do have CEU availabilities, so that is one avenue that we already have. Okay, remediation and,
I have a question.
Mhm.
Do you guys have an idea of a plan of how you're going to implement the clinical part of the study?
There's been some discussion about it. That's certainly part of the challenge, obviously, is implementing preceptors. Where the hope is that once the curriculum has been developed, that it aligns with the same thing that we've had with other programs that are distance learning, where preceptors will be brought from the community. One of the things that we have encouraged them to have is a preceptor development education, whether that's a webinar or some way to prepare the preceptors so that we're sure that they are able to complete the program the way it's been designed. So we don't have exact answers on that one yet, but I'll keep updating you as we get them.
Great, thank you.
Super. Are there any questions from the audience? Super. Thank you, Kaleem. Okay. Great. All right. We're waiting now for an update on the Midwifery Taskforce from Ms. Kirkmeyer and Ms. Webb. Agenda item 6.
Good afternoon. I've asked actually for this handout to be given to everybody, so hopefully all the members have it. It is actually an agenda item from our April board meeting. It's also in the back for those in the audience that they can get a copy of it as well. This was actually the agenda item that was presented at our board meeting in April. And what this was the outcome of the Midwifery Task Force meeting that had been held. We have 2 board members who are on this task force. Dr. Levine and Dr. Balat are the 2 members that are on the task force. And they actually met with representatives of CAM and CALM as well as ACOG to actually come together and try to find a way to really move forward with the regulations, or in the case of what happened at the meeting was we decided that the regulations probably wouldn't move forward until there was a legislative change. And so they actually developed language, which is on page 2 of the document there. And you can see it's in strikeout and underline. And so on page 3 is really where the changes are. So this language was put together. We actually did send it out to everybody, ask for feedback. We heard a little bit of information from each of the groups, and then Ms. Webb and I presented this at the board meeting with Dr. Balat. And the board members, there was comment there at the meeting, but ultimately the board approved this language. So at the intent at that time was then that we took it back, and what the board also approved is that we would ask our board to put this language actually into our sunset review bill or sunset bill that was moving forward at the time under SB 798. So that was what we wanted to have happen. We did take it back. We did provide it to the Senate Business and Professions Committee, and that was something that they had on their plate. But for those of you that aren't aware, our sunset bill actually did not make it out of the Assembly Business and Professions Committee, and so hence this wasn't added in. I'm not sure whether they would have added it in this year anyway, just because we were late in the session. But our intent is at this time not to have it in this year's legislative process, but we would seek legislation next year, because our board has actually already approved it, and so we could move forward with a new legislative proposal outside of our sunset bill. Anything to add, Carrie?
Are there any questions or public comment?
I have a quick question, actually. On the very top
of the page where we're looking at this, it uses the word woman, but all the others are stricken through for client, and I'm just wondering if that particular one was omitted on accident, or if that's actually the language that was approved that would be.
I think it's just, it might not make sense to say, and the client still desires to be a client. I think it was just the wording, and probably because that's the way the law is written right now. So we tried to make as
Okay.
few edits as possible on it.
Okay, thank you.
I think maybe, given that there are people who are pregnant who prefer not to be called women, we probably should correct that.
Okay. And that might be something that's an easy non-substantive change with the recommendations.
I don't think in this state we'll get too much backlash for changing it.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Boy, we're just moving right along here. There were no public comments on agenda item 6. Okay, we're moving along. Agenda item 7 is an update on the continuing regulatory efforts required by Assembly Bill 1308. And Ms. Webb is going to give us a presentation on that.
Presentation makes it sound larger than what it needs to be. Really, we're pending the statutory changes that will allow us to move forward with the regulations in a more reasonable way.
So we're in a
there-
holding pattern.
We are in a holding pattern. There hasn't been any movement. There's no current agreement right now between the interested parties who would be weighing in on this.
Any questions? This is basically, agenda item 6 and agenda item 7 are Siamese twins. All right, seeing no comments or questions, I'm going to move forward. Agenda item 8 is an update on the proposed regulations for midwife assistance, Title 16, Division 13, CCR sections 1379.01 through 1379.09. Ms. Webb, please.
And I do have some good news to report on this, that the regs have been reviewed and approved through DCA and agency. They are now being reviewed through the Office of Administrative Law, and I would expect to have some information within the next 30 days.
Yay. All right. Okay.
Hi, Karen Ehrlich, licensed midwife. Do we have a thought yet about when this will then go to the medical board?
Already been.
So we're talking, okay, I thought I had to go to the Office of Administrative Law after the medical board.
Yeah, but it already went to the medical board, then it went to DCA. Now it's at Office of Administrative Law.
I did not realize that in between step. That's why I got confused. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? All right. Seeing none, we're going to move forward to agenda item 9, which is an update on midwifery legislation. Ms. Mose is going to present on that.
All right, this is going to be a quick update. So I think I've reported before, AB 1612 and SB 457 are both 2-year bills. So they're in a holding pattern for now until next legislative session. SB 798, which is our sunset bill, as Kim just reported, it got held in Assembly Business and Professions Committee, but we are hopeful that the language will either, one, go in another vehicle, or there'll be rules waived, and that our sunset will go through. There's a couple provisions in there that are related to licensed midwives. It would allow licensed midwives and midwifery societies to existing peer review provisions and authorize licensed midwives to be shareholders, officers, and directors of corporations. What we're hopeful is just the language will go into another vehicle, and hopefully we'll be able to keep all of the provisions that we have in there.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Questions or comments from the audience? Rosanna?
Rosanna Davis, licensed midwife. So you think that the midwife provisions might even go in a bill this year?
I'm hoping that the stuff that's in our sunset bill that's not controversial, it'll actually stay in.
Okay.
But I don't know, but that's what I'm hoping.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks.
So you're thinking the controversial stuff, like the fixes for 1308, are probably not gonna
I
happen.
don't think so, because just the stuff now, we're probably going to have to take some controversial stuff out. So,
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments on this agenda item? All right. Moving right along. Agenda item 10 is an update, discussion, and possible action on the licensed midwife annual report task force. And Ms. Lowe is going to get us started.
Okay, a little background, as most of you are aware, we have provided a survey to all the licensed midwives a few times now to obtain feedback on how they would like to report their LMARs. Prior to submitting the LMARs this year, we added the survey ahead of logging into the LMAR on OSHPD. And based on the 364 midwives that reported their LMARs, nearly half of them, 182, actually exactly half, completed the survey online and provided us with their results. There were 2 questions asked on the survey, which basically came down to 1, do you want to continue to report the way we are, which is accumulatively at the end of the year, or to move to a prospective data reporting system similar to MANA. Of the results that we received out of 182, nearly 75% responded that they wish to continue to report the way that is currently being done. Based on those results, the overwhelming response to the option 1, a task force was held last Friday. And during that task force, the results were discussed as well as steps to move forward. So at this point, I'm going to hand it off to Ms. Sbar to continue.
Thank you. So due to the very short time between the task force meeting last Friday and today's meeting, I have created a report, but it's not available because it hasn't gone through all the channels. So I'm basically just going to update you guys on what we did. Most of the report that I have now is almost verbatim the same as the report that was given 2 years ago in August, so August of 2015. And our basic request is that we honor what the midwives have asked for, and that we proceed to make changes to the LMAR to make long-standing fixes to known problems. So we're not going to change how you're reporting your information, okay? It's still going to be done the way you've been doing it after the end of the year. The corrections are pretty much the same, with a few little caveats, which I'll go into. There are also areas that need further clarification, and so we would like to hold a interested parties meeting to basically to go over this report. By the time we have the interested parties meeting, the powers that be in staff will have had a chance to actually look at this. I didn't get it to them until late yesterday afternoon. And then we can kind of go forward. It is our hope, both those of us on the task force and the staff, that everything is completed in time for the collection of 2018 data. So there's no way to have it done for this year's data, but we're very hopeful that we can get it accomplished for next year's data. We didn't change anything in terms of general recommendations from the 2015 August report to now. We added some wording for the question in line 13, which relates to client services. It has read total number of clients served as primary caregiver during this calendar year. We thought that it was important, since some midwives do provide some basic family planning services, that it was clear we were only collecting data for birth-related care. So we added that wording, which will also require that on the definitions page, we add a definition for birth-related care. What does that mean exactly? And our recommendation would be that that would include anything that's delivered during a pregnancy or within the 6 to 8 weeks after a pregnancy has finished. So, if you're doing a pap smear, say, at 7 weeks postpartum, and you did the woman's birth care, then she's in that group. Okay. It would not include people that you saw for family planning, for instance, in interconceptional years. So maybe you did 2 births for her, and now she just needs her pap smear done, and maybe she's going to have another baby in the future, but she doesn't belong in this number. We left the number of clients who left care for non-medical reasons. We also wanted to include in that line people that were lost to care. So maybe you had somebody that you could never get in touch with again. She didn't come to her appointments, you couldn't find her. You don't know whether she left for non-medical reasons, but you don't know. So there'll be a definition added for that as well. Line 15, it did read the total number of clients served whose births were still pending on the last day of the reporting year. And it occurred to me that some people might interpret that as, okay, well, she's still pregnant at noon, so she's still pending on the last day of the year, even if she had her baby precipitously right before midnight that day. So I changed it to be pending on the first day of the new year. So if she's still pregnant at 12:01 on January 1st, she doesn't get included in these statistics, okay? And then line 16, collaborative care will be removed, and that will give us a total number of women covered in this particular report, derived from line 13 and line 14 and line 15. So somebody will do the math. And line 17, supervision, that line is going to be removed because there's no reason to continue to collect that information.
Ms. Pervon, can I make a suggestion?
Absolutely.
Because this is a recommendation from the task force, I recommend that you ask for a motion from the MAC to keep the reporting as it is right now at the end of the year. And then these proposed changes that you've been discussing are something that will be discussed at a task force meeting. I'm sorry, at an interested parties meeting. And then those recommendations will be vetted and brought back to the MAC for approval.
That's a great idea.
And so, two motions.
Okay.
So one to keep reporting the same.
Okay, and the other one to do the interested parties. Okay.
Right.
I just want to make sure that staff will get this out, a final version of it, well in advance. I know. Okay. So
It would be a document that would be presented for the interested parties meeting. So it would be
Correct.
available in the materials.
correct. Okay. Thank you. All right. So do I have a motion to accept the position of the licensed midwives who responded to continue to report in the manner they've been reporting it?
So I would so move.
I'll second.
Yeah. Is there any further discussion on that? No. Any public comments, questions? Okay. Seeing none, let's vote.
I'll take the roll call vote. Ms. Dugan?
Yes.
Ms. Holzer?
Yes.
Ms. Perez? Ms. Yaroslavsky?
Aye.
Ms. Sparvan?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay. Now I need the second motion, which would be to hold an interested parties meeting to discuss the outcome of the task force meeting and make further recommendations on changes.
So moved.
I'll second.
Is any questions, public comment? Okay.
Ms. Dugan,
Yes.
Ms. Holzer,
Yes.
Ms. Perez,
Yes.
Ms. Yaroslavsky, Ms. Sbarvon.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay, and I'd like to ask staff that if at all possible, we have the interested parties meeting enough in advance of the next full board meeting that I can give the full board some information in my report at the end of October.
Doesn't it have to come back to the net first?
No, I just want to be able to tell them we had the interested parties meeting. We won't have a full thing from the MAC until December, but, okay? All right, thank you. No further questions on this particular agenda item? All right. Agenda item 11 is the program update. Ms. Lowe, please.
Second. Okay, if you want to refer to tab 11 of your packets. The licensing statistics have been provided on page 14. As the fiscal year has concluded at the end of June, the total numbers for fiscal year 2015-2016 have been provided. 2016-2017. Yes. The overall numbers for the year remain consistent with previous year's numbers. We received 31 new complaints during the fiscal year received 31 new applications. I'm all over the place, sorry.
They're all complaining. All your applicants are complaining.
31 new applications during the year, and we've issued 30 new licenses during the year. If there are no questions, we can continue on to the hospital reporting form. Okay. Page 15 of your packets. During the year, we received a total of 199 reporting forms for licensed midwives. That was up from 140 the previous year. Again, the total for certified nurse midwives was 10 for the year, and 2 were unknown or unlicensed. As you can see for quarter 4, the unknown in the CNM reporting is continuing to decrease, and hopefully that will get down to 0 at some point. We anticipate that the numbers of reporting forms continue to increase over the years due to outreach and information being provided to the hospitals and midwives. Are there any questions?
So just for point of clarification, these are forms that are reported back to you from the hospitals?
Correct.
Do they match up with the number of births in hospitals?
No, they do not.
So what is the next steps is trying to garner this information from hospitals so that they're in line with the expectation of reporting?
Staff will continue to do outreach. That includes additional information provided to physicians as well as midwives. We did provide the article in the newsletter at the spring of this year, which got information out to physicians. In addition, we're going to be adding all of the licensed midwives to our email blast that goes out with the newsletter so that they'll have additional information when midwifery items are included. But as for outreach, staff is discussing possible options to get more information out there.
So at some point, will there be some kind of expectation of reporting to those entities that oversee hospitals?
Performing outreach to those hospitals?
No. If hospitals are not reporting information that they are required by law to report, that
I
we've gone
can
through all this work
help.
to.
So this form is not the ideal form.
Okay.
And you may recall there's been a lot of discussion about it. We had an interested parties meeting on it. We have been doing some work with ACOG on it, and last year attempted to get legislation put in place to beef up what we're asking for and make it clear who the form should go
Okay.
to. And that's still in process, and once the form is the way we want to see it, there will be a massive educational and outreach effort.
Okay, thank you very much for the clarification.
So, given that sometimes these things move very slowly, and we do have a form, I would think that the people to notify would be the department heads, not the physician, the nurse in charge of labor and delivery at the hospitals. By the way, you're supposed to be filling this out. Here's where you can find the form. And that would be kind of a way forward at this point. And then when we have a different form, it won't be such a big deal to say, by the way, the form's been replaced and here's the new form and here's where you can find it. Is that possible at all? I mean, I don't know how difficult it would be to figure out who those people were, but maybe it's a place to start.
And can I just add, it's my understanding that the midwives are not required to fill this form out. Right.
So I've
I know
actually
I'm-
done outreach to the California Hospital Association, and that's really probably where we need to get first. Like Ms. Webb said, we don't want to do it, requiring an all facilities letter with DHCS until we get that new form. But I can reach out again to the California Hospital Association and ask them, even if they have a list of everybody that we could send it to, and we can get that outreach done as well. But I've done it to them, I've given it to them, but it wasn't, it was their executive committee, so it wasn't all of the hospitals.
Right. I mean, even if they could just provide email addresses for these, probably nurses that had the labor and delivery departments, and then you can just send it out mass email to all of them, and then they've got it. And then maybe the numbers could add up.
Would it be possible to find out myself? I have had several transfers this last year, within the last 12 months, and I take the forms with me and I fill them out and I leave them and I take a copy. Would it be possible for me to find out if the forms if they're doing their part with those forms, with the copies that I have?
So we couldn't provide you that information, but we could probably go in the reverse. If you provided us the names of the facilities, we would then be able to check to see if those have been provided. Because we're counting those as confidential once they come in the door. But if you did provide us the names of the facilities, then we could actually check and see if they've reported, and then that would be something we could actually contact that facility and say, we understand this happened and we didn't receive a report.
I would be happy to do that as
great.
well with the charge that
Perfect.
said they were processing it.
Yep.
Right. Any other questions or comments on this agenda item? This bit of the agenda item? Okay.
Who's working on the draft of the new draft of the form?
We wanted to have some sort of legislative change, and I don't even, I'm sorry, at this point, remember what we were going to ask for, but staff is working on it.
Okay. If there are no other questions, we'll move on to the enforcement statistics, which are on page 16 of your packets. Again, the total numbers for the fiscal year have been provided. In addition to what's reported in the packet, you've also been provided a side-by-side yearly comparison of previously reported data for the fiscal years, just for easier comparison. And if anyone in the audience would like a copy, there are some in the back. For this fiscal year, the numbers for complaints received remain consistent with previous years, with a total of 14 coming in for the year. There were no cases referred for disciplinary or criminal action this year for licensed midwives. For unlicensed midwives, we received a total of 11 complaints during the year, and there was no referrals for discipline or criminal action. Are there any questions on the data that's being provided? For future MAC packets, we'll be providing the yearly totals in your packets. We'll separate out licensed midwifery statistics on one page, unlicensed enforcement statistics on a separate page.
Thank you. Any questions? All right.
Okay. On page 17 of the packets is a summary report of the licensed midwife annual report for data reported for the 2016 reporting period. In addition to the summary report for 2016 data, on page 23 of your packets, We have provided side-by-side yearly comparisons for previous years' data, which makes it a little bit easier to see the changes in data. Everything is listed in the side-by-side comparison. It's just totaled, so your transfers are totaled what you've requested in the past. Makes it a little bit easier to see the changes. If you'd like, I can briefly go over some of the highlights of the report, or just allow you to review it, and if you have any questions, I can answer it.
Say that bit about the transfers again, because I didn't quite get it.
So on the actual summary report provided by OSHPD, if you look on page 19, it lists the different types of or reasons for transfer, and it just lists your total number for each type or reason for transfer. In the side-by-side comparison, we have totaled those numbers for, Section G. We've just provided a total for all reasons.
Where?
Page 24.
You're looking at 19, I think.
So we've listed out on page 19 is the summary from
Okay, I
OSHPD.
see it.
And then
Thank
that's transferred over to page 24, where we list the same data side by side per year, and we provide you with totals.
Super, thank you.
Okay, I'll go over briefly some of the highlights. For 2016, there were a total of 412 midwives expected to report. Of those 412, we received 364 reports. I should say OSHPD received those, leaving 48 unreported LMARs. Each year, we highlight and emphasize the importance of reporting timely, because any reports received after the end of the online submission or the closing time for OSHPD is not included in the summary. So this year we received, we did not receive 48, which is actually the lowest number in the past. So that's progress. And of those 48, we've gone ahead and broke those down so to give you an idea of who's not reporting, if it makes any difference. Of those 48, we had 21 that were listed with the current status in the state of California. So of those should have been reporting whether they were practicing or not. There were 3 that were current, but they had an address out of state. 16 of those 48 were delinquent with an address in California. And of those 16, 4 of them had expired after the reporting period had ended. 4 had expired during the reporting period, and 8 had expired prior to the reporting period. There were 4 that were delinquent with an address out of state, and of those 4, 2 expired during the reporting period, and 2 had expired prior to the reporting period. Just a little insight. So there was also 2 that went into a canceled status during the reporting period, and 2 that had surrendered their licenses during the reporting period.
Would it be possible in future years to, the way that you've given us kind of side-by-side comparisons for the different sections to, oh wait, it's here, never mind.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to go over a few of the statistics. You can either follow along on that side-by-side chart or in the packets. In Section D, you can see that there were 5,420 clients served during the year, which was down from 108 the previous year. The number of clients who left care for a non-medical reason, though, decreased by 91. In Section F, you can see that there was an increase in the number of planned out-of-hospital births at the onset of labor, which was up by nearly 50, and the number of completed births out of hospital decreased by 64 compared to last year. That does mean, though, that the number of transfers should have increased, which is reflected in sections I and J, and those numbers went up appropriately. However, at the end of the report, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit, where it discusses the outcomes following transfer, which is on page 22 of the OSHPD summary. the total numbers that are listed in the outcomes and the delivery, whether it was vaginal or cesarean, do not match up to the number of transferred or should have been transferred. So that's something that when we revise the LMAR, it's to assist with making these numbers match up. There was approximately 646 that technically should have been transferred. However, on your outcomes after transfer of care, there's data for over 900. So something is not getting reported correctly, which we're all aware of at this point, but that's just another reason why we need to make this LMAR updated and meet the needs.
I'm so glad you're going to continue to work with us on this.
Yeah, so hopefully the revisions will let the data make show the appropriate outcomes for out of hospital and after transfer deliveries. That concludes my update on the stats. If there's any questions, I would be happy to answer.
Ms. Ehrlich?
Karen Ehrlich, licensed midwife. I'm noticing on the number who did not report that it is listed as 48, and yet on page 14 of the midwifery program licensing statistics, we've got 365 renewed or current. So that's a discrepancy that caught my eye.
It's not necessarily a discrepancy. The number that's expected to report is provided in December of the year prior to the reporting period, at the end of the reporting period. And so that number includes licensees that are in a current or delinquent status. Also, lost my train of thought again.
They're not equivalent timeframes
It's
of
different
looking at
timeframes, and it's
who's licensed.
only current and delinquent at the time that the data is provided to OSHPD.
Would it make sense to move the reporting to fiscal year so that we can somehow have these correlated properly?
Not at this point.
Yeah, I know, it's just another
But you can-
complication with the whole thing,
Yeah.
and,
We bring it to the interested parties meeting and
yeah,
we can
yeah.
discuss it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Toasty?
Tosi Marceline, licensed midwife. On the outcomes of out-of-hospital births, for the almost first time, there are 6
What page are
higher
you on?
order multiples.
What page are you on?
I'm on page 18, very last line. This seems impossible, but
Yeah.
and possibly means that somebody thought they were twins. I don't know, but that seems like maybe that line needs more
Yeah.
information on it so people can do it correctly. I couldn't find whether any higher order multiples were delivered after transport to the hospital, and there were quite a few multiples that were or suspected multiples transferred during pregnancy, multiple gestation being not divided up
Yeah.
under Section G as a reason for transfer.
Well,
So-
line 24 is specifically out of hospital. I suppose it could have been 2 sets of triplets, and they, instead of reporting it as just as one discrete event for each set of triplets, they reported it as 3.
Yeah,
We're not
yeah.
really sure, but it is a
hard to know.
suggested edit. It's a suggested
kind
edit
of
to change.
unlikely, isn't it?
Yeah, no, but we have it as a suggested edit to clarify that line. I think you're right. People are just
Yeah.
confusing it with twins.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments?
I'm Madeline Chernock. There is a maternal death listed in one section and not another for 2015.
Where do you see it?
So there is no maternal death listed on 23 for total outcomes in which birth, fetal demise, or infant or maternal death occurred. No maternal deaths, no maternal deaths. And then I'm on page 23. It's the fourth little table down. 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. And then on page, where are we? On 27, we have cesarean delivery due to the death of a mother. So, just wanted to point that out. So on page 27, the final table, total number of cesarean deliveries mother, we have a cesarean for the reason of the death of the mother in
That's
2015.
2015, yeah.
And yeah, I know. And on page 23, we have no maternal deaths reported in any of those years. So that's a big hot deal, please. Someone pay attention to that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Is it possible that the baby survived?
I would have to look at the data. All of the data that's reported here is taken from the OSHPD summary, so we can go back and review it to what was provided. If OSHPD reported it to us, that's what's being reported. There's a possibility it could be an error inputting the data, but we'll double check that. And if it needs to be updated, we'll do so.
Thank you. Any other questions, concerns, worries? All right. Seeing none, we're going to move forward to the presentation by the California Association of Licensed Midwives on the obstacles to care for licensed midwife clients by Ms. Davis. Can we have sunlight?
Light on your computer screen. Oh, well, that's different.
Good afternoon. I'm Rosanna Davis. I'm a licensed midwife practicing in the San Francisco Bay Area since 2004. I'm also part of the leadership team with the State Professional Association of California Licensed Midwives. Our acronym is CALM. Today I'm presenting several cases where problems with transfers from home or birth center to a higher level of care in hospitals happened, and one situation where there is an institutional protocol to not accept transfers from perinatal services, transfers to perinatal services and genetic counseling from licensed midwives for things such as positive prenatal screening. Let's see here. Whoops. So why talk about these challenges? Having information about challenges in the implementation of policy is obviously critical to creating policy going forward, but it also gives feedback about changes that would be helpful. For instance, in some regions and at some hospitals, licensed midwives are viewed as practicing illegally or as competition to the physicians and the hospitals. And in other situations, hospital staff is actually refusing to provide appropriate care to transferring clients that need medical attention. Midwives and the midwife profession can also make improvement. No one is immune to making improvements. But let's be careful not to blame the victims. Midwives are low in the social hierarchy. We all know that, any of us that are midwives. Being low in this social hierarchy has been shown to create a physiological response that creates ongoing stressors, feelings of helplessness, and poor health, and lack of creative thinking to create solutions or behavioral changes. Midwives can feel isolated and fear a complaint being filed even when they're following all the rules. This is especially true when there is ongoing hostility toward them or their clients at specific hospitals or with specific providers. CALM advocates for midwives to call us to be in communication with their professional association so we can talk through the issues and hear new ways that they might be able to be more assertive or proactive in their communication. For instance, we remind midwives to include the LM disclosure, including quoting the statute, in the patient records when transferring, and to highlight parts that are significant to transfers, such as the right for the client to continue collaborative care with the midwife, that LMs are not required to have physician supervisors, and that the midwife is required to speak to the physician directly. All these things have an effect on improving communication. We also recommend that midwives speak the language of the receiving physician and providers as a way of demonstrating cultural competence. For instance, using the word patient rather than client or mama, referring to a fetus rather than a baby, to wear a name badge so that you can be identified as a professional, and also using Sbar Reporting. Are you all familiar with Sbar Reporting? For anyone who's not, it's an acronym that stands for Situation, Background, Assessment, and Recommendation. It's a way of communicating that gets to the point and helps clear communication during a shift change or a transfer from one setting to another. It was developed because in medical settings because nurses tend to speak in narration and physicians tend to hear information better in bullet points. The same is true with midwives. They tend to speak by communicating in narration or through storytelling. So using the SBAR is recommended to improve clear communication. As a state association, CALM is in a unique position because we hear about what's happening around the state in different settings and among a variety of midwifery and medical communities. We are actually working on a program that we call CALM Transitions. It's modeled after Washington State's Smooth Transitions, and it's an opportunity to go into hospitals and educate hospital healthcare providers about licensed midwives, our scope of practice, and to invite them to create internal protocols for receiving transfers. All right, so let's get to this next one. So as I go through this today, please keep in mind some of this may be upsetting. I want to remind us to that when people let us down, that most of the time it's not because it's not intentional. It's usually because there's a lack of knowledge, or people have misinformation. They may lack motivation, or they might not have the resources or skills to follow through in a way that we expected them to. So keep that in mind as we go through this, and be thinking about where having information, motivation to do a better job, and resources or skills at hand might be helpful in situations going forward. And then how do we get that information out, provide motivation, and point to resources and skills? A couple of these cases need follow-up. Complaints and lawsuits have been filed. Even in these cases, think about whether these problems could have been prevented on the front end. So this first case, the reason for the transfer was for a retained placenta after 90 minutes. There was not active bleeding or signs or symptoms of significant blood loss. The client was 37 years old, gravida 5, para 4. She labored spontaneously at 37 weeks, had a normal delivery after 8 hours. This was her first home birth. She had a history of 1 preterm delivery. All her previous hospital births were with epidurals, and she did not breastfeed any of her children. This child she was able to breastfeed for 6 weeks, and we were very happy for her for that. What went well? The EMS was pleased with how the transfer went. An Sbar report was given. And the problem, though, encountered at the hospital, and this was a rather minor situation, but it happens frequently, this kind of thing. The doctor refused to look at the records that the midwife provided, stating that it would be a violation of HIPAA to look at the patient records from the midwife. Also, when the midwife reminded the hospital to provide the medical board transfer form, the doctor responded that report was only for lay midwives. And so, anyway, the midwife went ahead and pointed out the form, and things went better after that. I think it created a more professional atmosphere that they understood that there was some regulation going on. Anyway, the overall outcome was fine. The placenta actually delivered spontaneously in the ambulance on the way to the hospital, and the patient was discharged from the hospital after vitals and a basic exam. This next situation, the reason for the transfer was a change in fetal heart tone baseline from 130 to 100. There were some variable decels and some frank bleeding. Additionally, the patient requested an epidural. This was a 35-year-old, gravida 2, para 1. She had one previous Caesarean. The client was reported to have been well consented for home VBAC and trial of labor. In this area, the local hospital does not provide any trial of labor in the hospital after Caesarean. So what went well was that there was not, in fact, any uterine rupture. It was an appropriate transfer. There was a subsequent vaginal birth, and both the mother and baby were well. The problem encountered at the hospital was that the doctor refused to provide care unless the patient consented immediately to a C-section. She was quoted as saying, "I will not come to the hospital for a vaginal birth." The nurse refused to contact an alternate doctor. The patient was denied an epidural because she would not consent to a C-section, and the patient was pressured by the hospital staff to sign out of the hospital against medical advice. She did, in fact, she and her birth team traveled to another hospital during active labor when they felt compelled to do so, and she subsequently delivered vaginally at the second hospital. A sequela to this was that the patient was contacted by the first hospital and reassured that the staff would be disciplined, but that the hospital had no authority to discipline a physician, that a complaint to the medical board would be necessary for that. Oh, this next case was transfer for 42 weeks gestation, as is required in statute. Significant history was minor, except that group beta strep status was unknown. The client was 28 years old, gravida 2, para 0. The baby measured large for gestational age. What went well was that the labor progressed without complication. The problem encountered was that the OB nurse was sent in to tell the midwife to leave when the patient was 9 centimeters. The doctor refused to speak to the midwife and refused to provide alternate physician care. The OB told the family that this midwife was not a real midwife and was practicing illegally because real legal midwives had a supervising physician. Additionally, the doctor stated that she was traumatized by a transport at a different hospital where she was not the OB, but the mother and baby died after an amniotic fluid embolism. This was her explanation for why she refused to provide care while the midwife was present. Client's request for a different doctor was denied. The outcome was that the midwife did leave in order to facilitate the care for the patient, and the client went on to have a vaginal birth. This case, the reason for the transfer was an arrest of active phase. The patient was also an experienced licensed midwife. She's 35 years old, gravida 1, par 0, GBS negative. She had ruptured membranes for 7 hours. Her labor arrested at 6 centimeters for 6 hours. The amniotic fluid was clear and odorless throughout, and the fetal heart tones were reassuring throughout. What went well in this case is that eventually the difficult doctor went through a change shift and they received a new doctor. The problem that was encountered was that the obstetrician, through eye contact and body language, ignored the patient in midwife introductions. The doctor was quoted as saying, "The midwife records are not valid, and anything that you have to offer is not valid, and any information you have to offer is not welcome." The OB eventually yelled at the midwife to sit down. Your opinion doesn't matter. When the patient asked for different OB, her request was denied. The patient was denied an epidural until labs were done. Quote, "You're on my timetable now. We need labs before we can get you an epidural," when in fact the midwife and Kaiser had already run labs and all such records were available. The subsequent outcome was that she had a spontaneous delivery after a shift change. She got the epidural that she had requested, and sequela was that the parents, this is kind of unrelated, but with the same case. The parents were threatened with, that's supposed to be CPS, Child Protective Services, for declining a follow-up bilirubin after a first bilirubin was normal. And they signed out against medical advice in that situation. This transfer was for an arrest of second stage and a suspected occiput posterior position. The client was 29 years old, gravida 1, par 0, late to care with the midwife at 31 weeks, desiring an unmedicated childbirth. Her membranes ruptured and she started laboring at 40 weeks. After 18 hours and 24 hours, the client declined prophylactic antibiotics offered by the midwife. The client was GBS negative. The midwife admitted the client to the birth center prior to active labor so that the midwife could supervise the ruptured membranes situation closely. She labored actively for 7 hours, pushed actively for 2.5 hours without significant descent and with caput. No significant history was reported. What went well was that it was an appropriate transfer. The outcome was a Caesarean delivery after 90 minutes at the hospital. Problems encountered were multiple. The doctor demanded records on 3 separate occasions and was given the records on 3 separate occasions by the midwife. Doctor demanded midwife report who backup OB was. Patient expressed being disturbed by the doctor's tone of voice. The OB's response was, "Let's see what the medical board has to say about that." Doctor demanded on 3 separate occasions to know what the last fetal estimated weight was, and the midwife reported it each time. OB met with clients at a follow-up appointment and said to the clients, midwife not licensed, not insured, not regulated, no physician backup, lay midwife without education and not legal to practice in California. The doctor filed a complaint against the midwife, claiming the midwife did not provide records, did not arrive with the patient, claimed the midwife transferred an emergency situation by car, when in fact there was not an emergency situation, claimed the midwife provided negligent care, did not identify abnormal tracing, and that the midwife's judgment was impaired. The complaint was dismissed as all the records indicated the midwife provided appropriate care. The midwife spent $7,000 in lawyer fees. The midwife now expresses fear of transferring to this hospital, even though it is the closest to her birth center. There is one doctor, however, who will on the front end agree to take her transfers, but the arrangement requires that the patient have private health insurance, not Medi-Cal, or if they don't, that the midwife pay a fee of $3,000 to the physician. Therefore, midwife's decision-making has now in fact become impaired for fear of monetary retribution, stress of abusive treatment, and more unwarranted complaint with subsequent investigations. Recently, she took an unnecessary risk to go to a farther hospital. The outcome was good, but she understands that she can't keep doing that and that her fear needs to be dealt with in order for her to put her patient's safety first. So it's a very tragic situation where the parents and the midwife were investigated by law enforcement, interrogated by Child Protective Services after a fetal demise. The details were that the client was 39 years old, gravida 2, para 1. The client was seen by the midwife at a routine prenatal visit at 38 weeks. Fetal heart tones were clearly heard. There was spontaneous labor at 39 weeks. The midwife left to go to the parents' home early in the labor because she lived an hour away from the clients, at which time the contractions were 10 minutes apart. Upon the midwife's arrival, the delivery was imminent. The baby was born within 10 minutes. No fetal heartbeat was heard in that 10 minutes. The baby, when it was born, clearly had been dead for a while. The midwife called 911 within 3 minutes of the birth, and they left for the hospital via ambulance within 20 minutes of the birth. The obstetrician took a report from the midwife and managed to retain placenta, including some significant bleeding. And as soon as the mother was stable, the OB left the room, and shortly thereafter arrived 3 sheriff deputies, 1 coroner, and an investigator in the delivery room. Some significant history is that this client had delivered previously a 5-pound baby at 37 weeks, and during this pregnancy she had some spotting at 34 weeks. She was assessed at labor and delivery and then subsequently released without any indication of any problems. So during all of this, shortly after the investigators arrived, the father of the baby was taken to the family home where the house was searched for evidence for 3 hours, while the father of the baby, mother-in-law, and 2-year-old son waited outside, unable to enter the house or even use the bathroom. The mother was interviewed alone in the hospital and separated from her family during this time. She underwent mandatory drug testing, and the coroner insisted on taking the baby away, and only after much pleading were the parents able to be reunited and spend some time saying goodbye and grieving together over their loss. The midwife was also detained for separate questioning. Child Protective Services came for 3 visits to the home after they returned home to make sure the parents were not putting their other child in harm's way. So this case is very distressing for all involved. Baby's remains were returned to the parents after 1 month, and the investigation and autopsy is pending for as long as 8 months. Well, fortunately, most midwives rarely encounter this situation or even have it discussed in any detail in any peer review. So it's not readily apparent what the right thing is to do to avoid such an investigation in a tragic situation. Certainly a case like this would need to be reviewed, but it doesn't need to be a criminal investigation. So I would welcome any discussion with anyone who understands criminal law to figure out what could be done about this sort of thing, if anything. So this next situation, kind of lumped together, it's more of an ongoing situation than an individual case. And that is that Lucille Packard Children's Hospital perinatal services will not accept client referrals from licensed midwives, just as a straight-up policy. This policy doesn't seem to be written anywhere, but it is pretty consistent in practice. Lucille Packard, so it's not just at the Stamford location. They have satellite offices in several surrounding counties. And in Santa Cruz County, they are the only perinatal services available. Currently, midwives and their clients have workarounds, and the best one is that they just go to a doctor to do their prenatal screening, and that's typically more expensive, a duplication of care. If a midwife does need to refer for a positive prenatal screen, for instance, for Downs or trisomy 18, this situation creates delays in getting diagnosis and treatment if it's necessary.
I have a question, Rosanna, about this. It's been my experience that if there's a positive screen, the state agency that runs the screen makes the referral. Like often I have some of these results and I'm seeing them and I call the client and she's already knows where she's going because the state agency already contacted her. Will they not accept that referral either?
Well, sometimes the prenatal screens are through private companies. So,
Okay.
like the Free Cell
Okay.
blood screens. We have an expert here on this. Would you mind talking about it? Sure. Kelly? Yeah.
Hi, Kelly Olmsted, licensed midwife in Santa Cruz County. A lot of these are my issues, and what I assumed that this was a statewide issue because it is Lucille Packard Children's Health, their perinatal diagnostic centers. However, what I discovered through all of this is that Santa Cruz County is the only county in the state that has a perinatal diagnostic center, but has only that as their only option. So other midwives are able to work around by just avoiding Lucille Packard. Santa Cruz County, we are not. So even if I get a positive state screen, that is not acceptable. They will say, who is your doctor? When the mom calls to make her appointment, and if they don't have an OB, they say, I'm sorry, we don't see midwifery patients. We don't see the patients of licensed midwives. Don't know what to tell you. I have talked to the state screening. They say they have no ability to enforce. I have left messages at the head of Stanford Perinatology asking for callbacks, do not get any response as far as that goes. I've had multiple people. I had somebody who got, with an NIPT, got a positive screen at 12 plus weeks. She had been a little bit delayed in getting it. And by the time we got the results, she had 2 days left in order to get a CVS, and nobody would see her. And finally, I managed to get the OB on call for the house at the local hospital to agree to accept her as a transfer of care in order to get her seen by them. But by the time somebody has that kind of diagnosis, spending days and days and trying to get in here and trying to get in there and throwing things at the wall in multiple counties trying to get it to stick is exceptionally stressful for the client and for the midwife. And at this point, Santa Cruz County midwives are just going to have to send people over a mountain if they have people with positive screens. And this is the state screen, not just things like Maternity 21 and Council.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Is any of these midwives Medi-Cal providers? Are any of their clients Medi-Cal beneficiaries? Because that would be a really big problem if if the licensed midwives are Medi-Cal providers and they are referring to who they are supposed to. Plus, you can get an authorization even if it's not in the group.
That hasn't been the case for me. And I don't know if we have any providers in Santa Cruz County. We're a small little county. We may have somebody who's going to start taking Medi-Cal because she's opening a birth center. But as of right now, I don't know of any midwives in our county. You know, we have like
Are any
80 births a year.
of your clients Medi-Cal beneficiaries who are being denied the service?
Well,
And
I mean, this is the thing that's hard with this topic is for every person, you know, as licensed midwives, we often have people decline genetic screening, right? We also have people who started care with an OB and then transfer into our care at 20 weeks when they decide they don't like what they're getting. So and then we have people who do the screen and most people come back negative, right? So this pops up for me. I'm a pretty busy midwife in our county, but it pops up for me maybe once a year. And then you scramble and run around, and then you finally get people to the other side of it and you take a deep breath and then it doesn't happen again for somebody to get a positive screen. Nancy and I had this she would have probably been due to have her baby this coming month. So last winter with a positive NIPT, and she was the one they're like, she needs to get in right now. Like she's got 2 days left to get a CVS. Otherwise she has to wait a whole nother week to get an amnio. And sorry, we won't see her.
Thank you, Kelly. I'm glad you were here. to
Thank
talk
you.
about that. So COM is working with our lawyer on it too. Yes? Oh, yes, Linda.
Linda Walsh, immediate past president of CNMA. I started the midwifery service at Stanford, and as people who know the Stanford system knows, we were terminated there for a variety of reasons. I'm appalled when I see something like this. I still have very close relationships with several of the OBGYNs there, and I would be more than happy to try to have some conversations. I know there have been concerns among OBGYNs even about the leadership at this point.
Thank you. That'd be welcome, I'm sure.
Linda? So one more issue that came up recently at the same clinic, perinatal clinic. This client had its baby had a cardiac arrhythmia, and the midwife tried to get a referral into the clinic and was refused. The workaround was that the patient is a nurse practitioner who provides prenatal care, and so she had an in and was able to self-refer, which I don't think is available to most other people. Nevertheless, they still wouldn't speak directly to the midwife. They wouldn't provide records directly to the midwife. Ultimately, even these workarounds undermine the patient-midwife interaction and confidence in licensed midwife care, and it's time-consuming and stressful for the client. So let's end on a positive note, shall we? This transfer was for an exam by a physician and removal of a vaginal cyst discovered early postpartum after a home birth. The client was 35 years old, gravida 2, para 1. This was her first planned home birth. She had a normal delivery at home, transferred by car. The baby stayed at home with the father of the baby and a midwife assistant. The midwife called ahead and spoke with the labor and delivery charge nurse, gave an Sbar report to the nurse, and then gave a brief report to the receiving doctor over the phone, and in this case, a hospitalist. Upon arrival, the doctor introduced himself and knew the midwife and midwife student by name because he'd looked them up on the midwife's website ahead of time. He provided prompt care, calmly explained the findings and the plan to the patient, complimented the midwife's record keeping and care in front of the client, and the midwife in turn was very complimentary to the doctor and the hospital staff, as they deserved for the reception and the care they provided. The only problem that was encountered was the electronic records system had no option for admitting a postpartum patient. The situation was resolved, and the mother was discharged to midwife care within 2 hours. So I have a couple of final words. We live in a large state. Licensed midwives provide care to only about 1% of our childbearing population. There are approximately 400 actively practicing licensed midwives providing care to over 5,000 families a year now. Most of these courses of care result in uncomplicated births at home and in birth centers. Most transfers go well, and we never hear a word about them. We still have some work to do for outlier situations, though, where safety is put at risk for lack of information, motivation, or skills for making and receiving these appropriate transfers. I'd like to request from medical board staff the possibility of more articles in the medical board newsletter, maybe one that focuses a little bit more on best practices for transfers. This would be follow-up, of course, to the other articles that have been helpful. And my other request is if anyone knows the name of the Hospital Association rep that periodically attends the MAC meeting, if you could pass that name on to me. I want to be in contact with them about how we might work together with the Hospital Association to improve transfers. Well, thank you all for your time and attention today. Are there any questions?
Seems to me that clearly receiving physicians need more education about what a licensed midwife is, what they do, what our educational level is, and why we might be bringing somebody to them.
I'd like to add to that the fire department and the paramedics also need that education. I had a fetal demise, and they treated her as a criminal as this was done, and they don't know. And I was able to work with the Pasadena fire department to actually work with Black Infant Health so they could be more aware of their community. So I think that outreach needs to go even further.
Yeah. In your spare time, midwives. Are there any comments, questions? You haven't answered yet? All right. Seeing, oh, Tosi.
Tosi Marceline, licensed midwife. Kelly, yours is not the only county that has problems with physician groups not taking transfers from licensed midwives. There are several we've in our area, and it's always a tragic situation to have someone who has a real big problem and no one will see her. Not the person who is most appropriate to see her refuses to take LM transfers. We used to have a PA who was a midwife and a LM both who could interface with us and help, but she's now works at Stanford, not as a midwife. The other thing is that, Rosanna made a powerful and beautiful presentation out of the terror that we all have, that some of these situations are going to happen, and many of them have happened. That is not, it's a representational group of cases. It in no way is as many cases as actually happens. For example, in our group, we knew she'd have plenty. We didn't even bother her with ours. So it's something we should all keep in mind, and thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? All right. Thank you. So we're going to move on to agenda item 13, which is agenda items for the next Midwifery Advisory Council meeting.
Carrie, actually, I'm sorry, my brain's a little slow. It just seems like, especially with the state refusal of midwifery clients for positive screens, would the MAC be able to write a letter that we could send to the head of the newborn screening department, or whoever or the perinatal genetic screening folks, to say that there's a problem and it's come to our attention and we need to fix it?
I'm going to interrupt, and I'm going to suggest that maybe this is something that staff needs to take a look at, and they've got the relationships both with the legislature as with other government entities, and it might be a collaboration of bringing it to someone's attention, and for the person in the room to be in a position to make a difference and make some changes. A letter is kind of like it's not going to fix the problem. So if we're taking a look at the problem, the issue, I think we have to, thank you very much for the presentation. I think it brought everything to the forefront of what is slightly going on, representational, as was explained. But I think that that staff has heard the presentation, and I think that we have to depend on our support there for them to call and do whatever is necessary with the powers that be, whoever those powers that be are.
Yeah, I think what I'd add to that is the physicians themselves at this particular hospital have every right to say, no, I won't see so-and-so for whatever reason they deem. These women aren't being refused the state screen, which would be a different issue. They're being refused care post the screen, and it may be possible that state agency could put pressure on these perinatologists. I don't know.
It's not just the state screening that she's referring to.
Yeah, I know.
But I'm particularly talking about the state screening.
Kelly Olmsted, licensed midwife again. In addition to that, I have been on the phone with the head of the state oversight agency. I didn't bring notes to tell you, that oversees all the perinatal diagnostic centers, and she told me she has absolutely no ability to compel them to do anything. Right. She basically threw her hands up at me. It's really about getting Stanford, Lucille Packard Children's Hospital to change their policy about accepting referrals from licensed midwives. Their issue with us is that then, so after they do their assessment, then who takes over the care for this person? But that can all be put in process while this woman is getting timely care. We can be working on finding her an OB or whoever it is that she might need for post-evaluation care, but that's why they won't see us. So and that's coming from the top of Stanford, because the one in our county used to see people just fine, and then one time somebody with some fluid on their kidneys, and the report got sent up to Stanford, and the head of Stanford said, "Wait a minute, we do not accept seeing people from licensed midwives," and he put the kibosh on the entire program in all of their
maybe it becomes a situation of a legal situation, and that head of whatever that entity is not the only person that's in charge of making rules and regulations for the hospital and for their staff. So it becomes an issue where you're talking to the top person. There are other top people. There's lots of top people in the world, I find, and whoever thinks they're in charge.
And we do, and my understanding is CALM does have a lawyer who's been working on the research pieces of where to write this letter. The other thing that you have is that you have the women in crisis who this is happening to, and then once they're past it, they're so done. They don't want to go write a strongly worded letter. They just want to be past the hard part. It's like having somebody who spent 3 months in the NICU. Like after they're done, it's really hard to convince them to advocate, even though in that moment they wish somebody had advocated for them. Okay.
Got it. Thank you.
Karen Ehrlich, licensed midwife. I don't want to make this worse than it maybe is. And I just would like to make sure that people realize that the fact that we have these 9 cases that came to Rosanna doesn't mean that that's all that has happened in the state of California. We know that when surveys happen, that the instances are quite a magnitude more than what actually gets reported in surveys. Having lived through midwifery from basically its beginning of home birth midwifery in California in 40 plus years now, these issues have been with midwives and home birth families for 40 plus years. But they morph, they change. And I know that one of the things that a lot of us hoped was that with the onset of licensure that we were going to be able to have more of the respect and the ability to make these timely and rational and reasonable transfers. So it's distressing to the midwives when we find that despite having jumped through those hoops, that we're still having to struggle with this. So I just want to make that perspective, and I also want to state that a lot of the times now we are getting respectful transfers, and it can happen, it can change, and we can work with it and get it to shift more. Thank you.
Yeah, I would just add to that in the 20 years since I became licensed, I think there's been huge improvement in terms of how licensed midwives are viewed and actually interfaced with by the medical community. It's by no means perfect, and certainly there are more than 10 instances where it wasn't perfect in the state, but I really do believe we're making progress. So, thank you all. Anybody else? All right. Yeah. So, all right. We need agenda items for the December meeting. We're going to have the kind of the standard ones that we always have. Another update on the Midwifery Taskforce. We'll see where we're going, whether we're going to get any legislation out of this introduced maybe in the next year. An update on the 1308 regulations, update on midwifery assistant regulations. Hopefully, Office of Administrative Law will have said yay by then, and we'll have them. Update on any pending midwifery legislation, especially the 2-year bills, where we're going with those. An update on the annual report, interested parties meeting and task force, and where we're at with those updates, and the standard update on the midwifery program. Does anybody have anything to add to that from the council?
I would be interested in knowing the progress on the update for drafting the new hospital form and where that's at.
Yeah.
Did you mention an update on the American River College program?
I didn't, but we'd like to have that as well. All right. Is it my understanding, Ms. Webb, that on the hospital reporting form, we're considering going back into the legislative process to change what we can put on the form? Is that where we're at with that?
We were trying to do it that way, and that would have eliminated the need to do regs and also make it so that the form doesn't come to the board. It goes to,
The quality.
maternal quality
care.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the agency's name.
Maternal Quality Care Coalition.
Okay, I think that's right. So that would have been a good change. So that's something we need to revisit.
Okay. So we'll get an update on that. Does anybody else have any other stuff they want on the agenda for December? No? Yes? Maybe?
those changes that we were talking about with Elmar, or were you going to have some proposed ideas of those changes and what they would look like to help?
Yeah, as soon as the report's been gone over and before we do the interested parties meeting, it'll be disseminated. So you'll have it before then.
But yes, so she said she'd put that on the agenda for.
Yeah, it's there.
Yeah.
It's there, yeah. Anything else? All right. Since I don't see any further comments, this meeting's adjourned. Thank you all for being here.